Hi, I'm Pete Andresen with Andresen and Associates, and I have just gotten my 8th phone call about concerns about the next 4 years in the financial markets. So I got to get political here. Apologies. Let's build in the caveat that we don't really know what's going to happen. These are all guesses, but I want to tell you what I'm thinking. Now, I'm doing this at home because I decided to do this on the spur of the moment. So you'll hear family noises in the background, but just ignore those and let's get on with it. Bottom line, cut to the chase. I would not at all be surprised if we had a substantial stock market decline in the next 4 years. It's not a majority bet. I would not be surprised at all because I've been saying all along that valuation is key, and valuation is what's happening right now. Things are way overvalued. They got more overvalued. Another thing to think about is the bond market, when that happens, will go up because interest rates will be forced down. It is hazardous to take an extreme long bond position right now, in my opinion. So, short answer. I think the stock market may easily decline in the next 4 years. It might double before it declines. I think that the bond market will see some turbulence before it settles down to mildly lower interest rates. I think that with President Trump, we're looking at mildly higher inflation to substantially higher inflation if the tariffs actually go into effect. That's what I think. We can discuss it on our phone calls. Digging in deeper, take a look at this graph. Americans aren't satisfied. Out of the last 10 elections, according to Colbert Kravis Roberts, KKR, Americans have voted for change 9 out of the last 10 times. They have not accomplished that change. 50% of Americans have that small sliver down the chocolate brown sliver at the bottom. The middle class and the lower middle class and the people who live in the economic strata below that have clamored for more, and they haven't gotten more. And it's not a question of giving them more. There are a certain amount, as J.D. Vance's, that's Vice President-elect J.D. Vance's book, Hillbilly Elegy, points out, there's a degree of self-destruction going on the deeper you go into that 50% on the low end. But the fact is that there's a clamoring bunch there who's striving very hard to make it. Meanwhile, Ivy League universities produce about 0.06 of, well, let me put it this way, 0.6% of college graduates, and yet they intend to rule us, to listen to Hillary Clinton talk about deplorables and people like that. And as we just saw with the riots, the anti-Jewish riots in the Ivy Leagues, that's wearing thin for many Americans who have trade school degrees or degrees from, quote, lesser, end quote, colleges. Also, when it comes to American wars, it's rich man's war, poor man's fight. Take a look at this graph. The middle class is overrepresented among military recruits, and the bulk of them come from the lower 50% of the middle class, and then you drop into poverty. The reason impoverished people can't do it is they can't join the military is obesity and dysfunction, drugs. Lifespan for people below the 50% mark is really substantially less than the upper 50%. That started with COVID. Remember back in 2020 I mentioned that we were starting a great experiment. Well, we've started it. And death rates among the truly impoverished, again, some of that self-created, but there's a fair number of people who are in the lower middle class or below that economically who are just as intelligent, who want to get educated, who want to thrive and want to survive, and it's very hard for them, and they fight all the wars. The result is, look at this graph, that the Republicans and Democrats have shifted, they've flipped in the last 40 years. Under 50,000 voted Republican, 50 to 99 to 100,000 basically voted Republican, and the wealthy voted Democrat. Democrats are now for free trade, which was originally a Republican thing. Defense hawks used to be Republicans, now they're Democrats. Literally the parties have switched places. So what does that mean for us? That means that they would have elected Mr. Peabody, the talking dog, as president after the last 4 years simply because of inflation. Everything costs 40% more than it did, as I pointed out in my last video. So what does that mean? That means that several things will happen. Excuse my kicking the stand. We're dealing with a net interest payment from the United States that's greater than the national defense budget. So we're looking at a couple of things happening. The first scenario is with President Trump, he doesn't complete his term. They played that card on President Biden. It could happen very easily with President Trump. And it's likely to happen if he keeps making unserious appointments to head up his government. The current appointments he's making right now indicate either a lack of seriousness or a bizarre sense of retribution. But let's say he gets what he wants, and it works. Okay, look in the mirror. What do you think the chances of that are? Let's take a moment. How likely is he calls up Vladimir Putin and he says, "Hey, Vladimir, get the heck out of Ukraine." And Putin says, "Oh, right you are," and out he goes. Or if he does the tariffs. Anybody remember the Tariff Act of 1930 that Herbert Hoover, I don't want to call him Herbert Hoover, Herbert Hoover signed into law in 1930? Remember that? After the Roaring '20s, he signs this Tariff Act, Smoot-Haley into law, and we have big tariffs, and all of a sudden there's a big trade war, and all of a sudden there's a depression. Do you think President Trump wants to get stuck with that as his legacy? Yeah, unless you think tariffs work. Let's see what happens. What's in it for the lower 50%? Because remember, they're the swing vote. They've voted for change 9 out of the last 10 times. Or President Trump gets what he wants and it doesn't work. Okay, so what do you think the chances of that are? Yeah, it's a Republican Congress, but if you look at the Congress, the way Congress is lining up about his appointments, do you think they want to get saddled with this? Do you think they want to get saddled with who lost Ukraine? Remember, the lower 50% economically fights the wars. It's their blood. It's their children. It's them. They're the ones who bleed. For us, it's, oh, it's so sad. War is a terrible thing. Let's protest. For people who actually join the military, it's missing limbs and coffins. Okay? So, how do you think they're going to like it if Ukraine falls, Europe rearms, we have a new Cold War, and there's a mandatory draft? Do you think President Trump wants that on his roster, his legacy? Do you think congressional Republicans want that as their legacy? Because that's what's going to happen. If Ukraine falls, it's going to be a who lost China moment if you happen to be around in the 1950s. Think about how we now consider one of the most intelligent, altruistic, all-around good people, genius guys, a billionaire at the time, Herbert Hoover. What do we think of him? We think of him as a Depression president. Is that what Trump wants? Is that what the Republican wants? Which leads us to the next thing. He doesn't get what he wants. Oh yeah, it's dominated by Republicans. All political parties always go too far at some point. It might take them a couple of years to build up speed, but the Democrats went off and embraced the bizarreness of wokeness, and that came back to punish them because it wasn't relevant for people, okay? My Filipino immigrant wife looks at the idea of reparations for slavery and her eyes cross. I mean, it's just bizarre. So, assuming that the Republican Congress will go too far, they may not go too far with Trump's guidance. They might go off like a herd of cats. We got 2 years to the next election, and the Congress knows that, right? Traditionally, what follows when a party comes to power is the next congressional election 2 years later is a sweep for the opposite party. And I predict that. I think that we'll see. I predict it. I'm just guessing like the rest of the world. I think that's going to happen in 2 years. Meanwhile, I think Trump is largely going to get thwarted. Or you could have the opposite extreme. The Republicans go too far even for Trump. Remember that Project 2025 or whatever that thing was called? It was nuts. And he's not going to, he's unlikely to go with it. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that if you look at presidents, look at George Bush II, he got elected on a whole platform, detailed platform. What do you think happened to him with 9/11? In other words, the president gets elected and then events shape the presidency, not the other way around. So, I'll do a video next week, talk about some of the things we can do, but basically our portfolios are already there. I have no idea about the details of the next 4 years. A little bit of chaos is likely. It's not likely to end the American experiment. It is no need, we have no need to slink out of America and go live somewhere else. It'll get painful. If mobs take over the streets, we'll deal with that when we come to it. But I think that, once again, there's all this media out there that's trying to misguide us and mislead us and play us. Both sides of the political spectrum are making comments that are just irresponsible in their radical claims. But yes, to cut to the chase, I believe that in the next 4 years, the chances of a stock market decline are high, and they'll be based on valuation and debt, just like every other decline. And the bond market is going to be turbulent, but if we have a recession, which is still a possibility, or a decline in the stock market, interest rates will come down and bonds will go up. So, not the time for radical bets, not the time for betting the farm, but also not the time to sell out. Believe me, short-term selling is very hard to manage successfully. With that in mind, it's Friday evening, and I'm going to go out and watch my daughter at a high school play. Thank you deeply. Call me if you have questions. 8 of you already have. And blessings.